We'll be starting shortly, if anyone's on yet. Waiting for our audience to populate, which is a line I never thought I'd say. But here we are, waiting for our audience to populate. So give it a few more seconds. All right. Give it a few more seconds. I'm watching our participant number go up, which means that Zoom hasn't fully brought everybody in. So when that stabilizes, then we'll get going. Okay, well, I think we have everybody here who's at least starting with us. So welcome. My name is Burke Smith. I am the CEO and founder of StraighterLine. I have an illustrious panel with me. You are at the notes or the Rethinking Admissions webinar, and we hope you will enjoy the next 45 minutes to an hour or so. So quickly, let me introduce the illustrious panel, provide a little bit of context, and then we will jump right in. So I'm not sure how people see the different panels on their screens, but I can tell I will start from left and go clockwise with mine. But at the top left of my panel is Rini Eborn. She is the Assistant Vice President of Strategic Initiatives and Deputy of Digital Transformation at Utah State University. Next is Brandon Juganatos. He is the VP of Enrollment Management and Student Success at National University. And then at the bottom of my screen is Xenia Henderson, and she is the Director of Member and Partner Engagement at the National College Attainment Network. So I'm going to give a few comments to try to set the stage about what's going on with enrollment. And then I'm going to ask our panelists to provide comments, both on short-term issues, how they were able to overcome what has been an unexpected and crazy year of admissions, and then second, long-term, what to think about for the future. So a little context, serendipitously, there was an article in Inside Higher Ed this morning about enrollment drops in higher ed, spring enrollment declines. And so here are the numbers, and they're kind of grim. But overall, undergrad enrollment was down 6% across higher ed. Community colleges were down 11%. This is on top of 5% and 10% reductions last fall. So it's a enrollment decline that is worsening, not getting better. And this is even worse for students of color across the board. Not everything is down. Graduate enrollment is up about 5%. And then national low-cost online colleges are up. So the Southern New Hampshire's and WGUs of the world are actually up. And then non-college providers of coursework, StraighterLine being one, but Coursera and others are significantly up as well. And this college enrollment decline is a little weird because that is not what we have come to expect in higher education. We've come to expect higher education enrollment to be counter-cyclical, that when there's a recession, under or unemployed workers return to being students where they can upskill, retrain at the government's expense generally. And in 2008, enrollment was up about 10% at the last recession. So this is uncharted waters for higher ed, where enrollments go down during a recession. And so I'm sort of the player manager for this webinar. So I have a little bit of my 2 cents, and then I'll turn it over to our panel. I think what you're seeing is a difference in the landscape in the last decade. You have national universities who are online that were not really present in the way they are now a decade ago. You have non-college providers of post-secondary coursework at different prices and at different increments that have grown in that decade. And you have had prices, tuition, continue to rise over that decade as well. So the combination is students have options and the ROI to a degree is worse than it was, and students seem to be voting with their feet in some way, shape, or form. So that's my 2 cents. Others probably have different perspectives. So I'm going to start by asking Xenia to weigh in on what she has seen over the last year and a half, and how colleges have responded, what are national patterns, and anything else you'd like to weigh in on.
Yeah, thank you, Burke, and many thanks to you and the folks at StraighterLine for the invite to join this illustrious panel, as you called us. So thank you for that. And I want to just add very quickly, sort of where my perspective is coming from. Representing NCAN members, K-12, CBOs, a range at higher ed, a range of folks nationally across the board, but also I think very much representing the kinds of students that NCAN members serve. And so as a first generation college graduate myself, Black and Latina, from Texas, who sort of grew up with all odds against her, and benefited from programs like Upward Bound and some other TRIO programs, very much speaking from this personally, as the work that our NCAN members do is very near and dear to my heart. So wanted to just plug that in so that, folks really kind of understood where I'm coming from and sort of what we're seeing. And so I'm really glad that you brought up the enrollment declines that data from this morning. They are steep and they are not good. And after, so many years of kind of making some stride in enrollment numbers and increasing access to Black and Brown students, to see this drop particularly affecting that population is pretty devastating. I will say, one of the first indicators that we had at NCAN was around FAFSA completion as a key enrollment indicator. And so we saw that has been down consistently. I think the ultimate low it hit was like 16%, pretty early on back in like October, November, December, when FAFSA first opened for the academic year. And so already, that was a red flag for us across the board, where we saw, if students are not completing FAFSA, they don't think they're going to college, or they're not planning on going to college. Currently, it's down, I think, at 6.4%. And I invite folks to take a look at that data using NCAN's tool, our FAFSA tracker. It's formyourfuture.org, and I can plug that into the chat for folks to take a look at. You can see that the data is broken down by state, by city. It's not student level data yet. And that's another thing that I want to point to in terms of what we're seeing higher ed respond to, how higher ed is responding to this and partnering with organizations across the country, with high schools, to try to increase FAFSA completion, to increase data sharing, to really find out kind of what's going on with students, who's planning on enrolling, who's not, what are they thinking about, and what are their needs? Is it about financial? Is it about location? Is it, what are sort of the barriers? And I'm sure that my colleagues here will touch on some of the things that they're seeing from their student populations around, needs that really are beyond just the academic and financial. What COVID has exacerbated for everyone is mental wellness, right? And so we know that students' needs are diverse. Students who are from low-income backgrounds, who are first generation to college students, have some very specific needs. And so that's some of the things that we're seeing. The other thing I want to touch on very, very briefly, that I know my colleagues will also expand on, are, what we saw COVID do was really move a lot of colleges and universities to opting for test optional or test blind policies. But because colleges stopped requiring the exam, it doesn't mean that students necessarily stopped taking the exam. And so what we saw from some of our NCAN member organizations across the country was that they were still seeing the discrepancy between the students of color and students from low-income backgrounds that they were serving compared to their wealthier white peers, who were still getting access to test prep, who still had access to, find and travel to testing sites that were open to be able to take the test. And so, for us, we were kind of left with is test optional really test optional? And while we saw college application numbers increase, from these student populations to to institutions like UC, who completely stopped the test requirements, we'll see sort of what an actual enrollment looks like, or what acceptances look like. We have yet to see some of that data. I think that'll be really interesting to see.
Great. So very helpful. Thank you, Zinnia, for some overview. Want to get into the nitty-gritty details and turn to some colleges and representatives of those colleges and what they did, how they managed, muddled, strategically got through this this past year and probably the next fall also. So Rini, why don't we turn to you? And I'd love to hear how Utah State has both managed the past year and probably through the fall, and then also what you're thinking about for the future.
Thank you, Burke. Yes, I was extremely proud of the way that Utah State University and the leadership approached the pandemic the last year. We had a lot of great leaders that came together, and they were very nimble, and they made some great decisions to move forward. We were able to move, thousands of classes into an online remote environment within like 4 or 5 days by expanding into some of our departments and getting help from even some of our alumni and staff. And so we were able to continue to offer educational offerings and keep our campus moving forward throughout the last year. We were able to have a fall semester via social distancing. It was very limited and it took a lot of work, but we were able to do that. But we did see declines. We did see some of the same things that you mentioned with our students, wondering, well, if we're going to be online, is it going to be, less money? Are we going to be able to have a tuition reduction? They wanted to be able to have events, and we had to cancel a lot of our events and do things more virtual. And so it was a great time for growth for our institution, and we'll talk about that in a little bit farther along. But for me, it was really interesting to see how fast the leadership and the educators at our institution pulled together and created a plan for staying open and moving forward. As well, we were able to, we made our exams, we piloted test options. We had different type of reviews of scholarship. And one thing that was really unique that we launched last year, it wasn't part of the pandemic, it was something on our plan, but we were able to leverage it and move fast, is we created a student money management center where students could come, and if they had concerns about their money and how they were going to stay in school, we have a center for them to help teach them about how to do that. And so that was extremely well received this last year as well. Additionally, we created some new pathways for students, and we changed the way that we moved into accepting students. For instance, Utah State University is the land grant institution for Utah. And so our mission is an access-driven mission. And so this last year, we were able to also create some pathways when, instead of sending decline letters to students if they didn't qualify to come, we were able to create different earned admission pathways where they could come and do things in a very personalized way to meet them where they were at. And so we were really excited about that. Additionally, we created a lot of marketing material and a lot of invested in a lot of short interactive videos for our students this last year because everything was moved to virtual. So we had to change all of our student services and our student support and everything into a virtual environment, which was very rapid, and it ended up being very successful that we were able to do so.
Are you leveraging those for next fall? Are you using those as marketing materials? Are those sort of features you're now talking to students about who are incoming?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of things that we've done this year that has really pushed us forward for the future, because we were able to move so rapidly, especially in the area of technology and marketing and communication. So for instance, with the marketing, we had a large campaign planned around billboards and ads and things like that. And last year, because of the pandemic, we had to pivot very rapidly and moved into the digital marketing environment, which for public institutions, that's something that we haven't always done. The big players in the space, they do a lot of marketing online and digital marketing, but for us, that was something new, and we were able to do that very successfully.
Great. Brandon, I'd love to hear from you and kind of what National did in response to the pandemic, both last year and then in the next few months.
Sure, thanks, Burke. Yeah, I would echo many of those similar challenges. And when in March, when we all kind of got the initial messaging, National University, to some surprise, actually has over 30% of its student population that takes some campus-based curriculum. And so to that extent, we did have some migration of folks to the online environment. Worked very well with the academic side of the organization, who was quick and nimble in establishing the necessary partnerships to continue and provide some continuity to those students who were already active in program, and then those, of course, who had an interest in getting started shortly thereafter. Some other very specific areas that I think are worth noting, the conversion of over 350, almost 400 employees who support enrollment management, admissions, financial aid, and so forth, all also had to go home. And so the technologies and tools that these folks use on a daily basis also required some revision, modification, and some enhancements. I think these, have, of course, even being an online institution, challenged every unit and department to think differently and how we can continue to provide not only levels of continuity, but accelerate ways in which we can continue to support students. And that, I think, is a bit more reflective of what we've experienced, which is increased student need. And those needs have been very diverse, as Zinnia had noted. National University, it does serve a very heterogeneous student population. Over 60% of our students self-report as non-white. For those who are benefiting from our programs, their needs are not just those within the classroom. Many environmental challenges, our wellness support areas of the organization within our Office of Student Affairs had to literally quadruple the way in which it can support those needs. And those are varied, right? Mental health issues, housing, financial, food insecurities, things that the institution has supported, but never at the level for which we've experienced during the pandemic. And so I certainly would say hats off to our teams and our staff and faculty for stepping up and establishing the appropriate partnerships needed to support the students. That I'll also say is that technology has really helped us make leaps and bounds. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about technology in today's conversations, but the introduction of artificial intelligence, chatbot tools, things of such that allow us to provide students more engagement, more contact, providing them more access to resources in real time. They have a 1:30 a.m. question, what information can they actually get access to? If 1:30 a.m. is the only time that they can actually support writing tutoring, what types of resources does the institution offer that make things more accessible to them? And that's really the lens that we've taken within National University, is establishing that some of our support services required multiple versions and variations in ways in which students would experience them. So everything from an asynchronous option to a very synchronous, one-on-one relationship that you can establish with those students. Many of our students are also parents. We're an adult serving institution as well. And so things like establishing childcare and all of the things that we know, even as employees of our own organizations, our students experience as well. And so these are, to say the least, just a small list of things that our students have had to overcome. And of course, from our standpoint, challenge the institution to do everything it possibly can to meet them so that they certainly can continue to achieve their goals.
Brandon, what are some very specific things you guys will be doing differently next, well, it's not even next, we're getting close to next fall, this summer, in preparation for next fall, relative to what you would have done in a pre-pandemic environment?
Yeah, this time has really allowed the institution to take a deeper look at how it understands its students. And so National University has launched what we refer to as our Programmatic Holistic Student Support Program. This is a program for which we gain as much understanding as possible about our students, the holistic perspective of the students, everything about where you came from, where you are now, where you want to go. That includes understanding what are your goals, not just thinking about the program and or the credential that you need, but figuring out more specifically, what are your short-term and your long-term needs? In the pandemic, we acknowledged that many students, while they were there to pursue a program that would ultimately result in a long-term employment opportunity, also had very short-term employment needs, right? And so that allows the institution to think more specifically on how we can support them while they're in our programs so that they can continue to participate in the programs, let alone, of course, complete them. And so the holistic support model allows us to gain a deeper understanding of where they are developmentally, provide a more personalized approach to the way in which we're planning coursework, leveraging prior learning, for which addresses things like cost and affordability, and accelerates their ability to career readiness or job readiness, depending on what the more proximal types of milestones are for those students. And this approach is something that we've begun to roll out now, and will continue to do so as a strategy, and will be integrated throughout the organization, including but not limited to all of our faculty, adjuncts, and other support providers who engage with students on a daily basis.
Terrific. Zinnia, Brandon mentioned that they were using AI, among other things, chatbots and such, as an example. And I know other institutions are as well. So it's a good bridge to ask you, what are you seeing as best practices around the country? What's happening in preparation for next year that was not happening a year ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely, to build on the technology piece, that's definitely something that we're seeing, that folks are leveraging, not just technology, but also relationships with students. On the technology front, we're seeing text messaging apps like Signal, through SignalVine, chatbots, as Brandon mentioned, through AdmitHub. We're also familiar with Persistence Plus. And so they do sort of this behavioral nudging, right, that students are in need of. And as Brandon said, it's happening at, not just between the 9 to 5 kind of hours, where different, varying students have different needs and different hours. So those kinds of quick responses to students' questions are super helpful in just kind of, continuing to address, questions, anxieties, providing reminders and those kinds of things. The other thing that we're seeing again is we're hearing from a lot of folks about the value of, again, the direct relationships, right? And so from, high school counselors, from, CBO advisors, saying that if they know somebody who had a relationship with a student, if they had the particular relationship with a student, really connecting with students personally. And so in this case, the mass messaging isn't working, right? It's not reaching them. Students, what we saw was many students and families had very, very limited access to technology, especially when we're talking about, students in rural locations, with spotty internet, Wi-Fi, no ability to print, all kinds of technology issues. And so, we have folks out there thinking really creatively about how to reach students, sending out street teams, hanging out where teenagers might be working for the summer, where they're hanging out after school, outside of those virtual hours. And so getting really creative in that way to really reach students, both again through technology and relationships. The other thing I want to point out is, again, around the FAFSA completion issue, and knowing that was such a key indicator of enrollment. We saw some really, really creative and innovative approaches to that. We saw folks in Mississippi and Arizona doing FAFSA drive-throughs. And so they actually leaned on what they saw, with COVID testing happening through as drive-throughs. They started doing FAFSA completion as drive-throughs. So a family could pull into their vehicle. They were handed an iPad that, was then mirrored onto a larger screen that an advisor could be looking at. And so that was a substitute of when, in a school setting or an after school program, that advisor is leaning over that student's shoulder or that family's shoulder, watching them complete a FAFSA. So that's sort of what that substituted. We also saw in Cleveland a FAFSA mobile bus. So again, kind of really that approach of like taking it to the homes, into the communities. They flipped a van or a bus and, brought in this FAFSA on wheels into the communities. And, and of course, we're following all the safety procedures. We saw live virtual sessions in Broward County and in Florida. And so I think all of these efforts, really they were really creative. I think they were really thoughtful about the resources, the time that was required to reach students in these very creative ways. In terms of what we're seeing in the sort of the longer run, I think we still have yet to see, because everyone's sort of waiting to see what is going back to in-person looks like. I do think that a lot of people are going to maintain this pivot to the virtual assistance, because there was some benefit, right, to reaching more students, reaching them more creatively, not necessarily having to require, students having to be at a certain location. Those kinds of things did come with some advantages. So I think really we'll see sort of what that continues to look like in the near future.
As I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of a player manager in this webinar, and with the player hat, which is StraighterLine. Some things we have been working with colleges on is creating, Utah State being one, we're creating low cost, low risk entry points or re-entry points, depending on how the school wants to use it under their brand. And it's basically a way to, in Utah State's, for students who can't be immediately enrolled to be able to take coursework that then make them eligible to be enrolled, or for at-risk students, and also a way to have a low price entry point that makes it different from the rest of the, or differentiates the school from the rest of the online providers that are now ubiquitous for every student. A few general questions for everybody, and kind of we can do a round robin, and eventually we'll get to Q&A. We have some interesting questions coming in, going to hold those for now. What one thing do you hope the pandemic will forever change about higher education access? And I'm not going to call anybody, just shout it out when you feel inspired. And if you don't, then I will call on you. So
I hope that the one thing that will stay the same is how fast we were able to make important changes that our students needed. I hope that we will continue to do that. I was very impressed with the way that we were able to just move things to virtual events, virtual things, and get through some of the bureaucracy that sometimes we have to go through. I really enjoyed being able to move through that very quickly and be able to actually implement some real change on campus. And so I hope that continues to move forward.
Great.
I think it's begun, which is that we're being challenged to serve students, differently. And I think from that standpoint, the one size approach across services areas and organizations has kind of come to a screeching halt. And I think, we've described ways in which students might need to access resources. We need to really think more holistically and globally across the organization. It isn't just the way in which students interact with the student finance office or the admissions side of the organization, or even our website, but how does a student actually get the support that they need if in fact the only time that they can is after hours or not when there are any appointments available, and thinking more around the blend of technology and people and processes for which we're able to meet students really where they are. And I think that is the continued challenge. But I think that culturally speaking, I can speak specifically to my organization. I'm pleasantly surprised to see how many faculty and staff have risen to the occasion to really kind of break the paradigm, even as an online institution with distributed locations, even challenge us further, right, to think about how we can support students very differently all the way at the time in which they're even thinking about going back to school. And I think that's probably the most inspiring and most important part, I think, of this pandemic.
That's a loaded question. We have a lot of rebuilding to do around these systems that are currently in place, for a system that wasn't built for students who look like me, right? We'll be really honest there. I mean, I echo what Brandon said in terms of, kind of the holistic, the wellness, recognizing the varying needs that are beyond just academic and financial. When you think about just access and admissions requirements, we have an opportunity to really think through, what that actually looks like. Again, rethinking test optional and looking more at test blind. We have an opportunity, I think, to look at affordability. Brooke, you mentioned that earlier, and college affordability has been an ongoing issue for Black and Brown students. Which NCAN has been heavily advocating, not just for, yay, finally a simpler FAFSA that is to come, and we'll see what that actually looks like, but doubling the Pell Grant amount, and while we just saw, the push for free community college, again, when we're thinking about students who are Pell eligible and have a full Pell Grant available to them, community college tuition was already quite affordable, right? And so now we're talking about really access to four-year institutions, and making that the most affordable option. So there's a lot I'd change and want to keep and do more and better of, but that's probably a whole nother conversation.
Well, let me build on that a little bit and sort of come full circle, and then kind of after this round of comments, we'll open it up to the audience. But I started out the conversation by laying out this kind of weird dynamic, which is that students are not enrolling when they really should be, and those students are either not going at all, they're being somehow shut out of the system entirely, or they're going somewhere else. And so with that is kind of what the data is telling us right now. What do you all see for the future for higher ed admissions? How will do you think it's going to bounce back? This is just an anomaly. Do you think that it's going to continue to decline? Because one could argue that, if enrollment declined when it shouldn't have, it's going to keep going further decline down the road. Now, or it could bounce back. I don't know, but I'm sort of asking you all, given these weird numbers and the weird environment that we have now seen and has now been verified, it's counterintuitive. What should colleges do next year and the year after, really the longer term, to address that and kind of to remain relevant?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take this one, Burke. To start, I think, from our standpoint, we can see a lot of different shifts in our student population. While we do experience declines and are very representative of the data that was shared, I think we also see some interesting trends, which are students are gravitating towards programs and courses where they can get the skills and competencies in some cases that do lead to licensures and certifications that have, in some case, correlation to workforce and industry. I think from our standpoint at National University, we're going to be very focused on helping understand more about the student and getting an understanding of where and what are those goals and trajectories. In some cases, as Zinnia has described, an entire cost of a program may be very intimidating or just not available to them based on their resources and dispositions. And as a result of that, often don't choose the option. So making sure that students are aware that there are low cost, more effective strategies, lower risk opportunities for them to pursue the types of skills and competencies and educational coursework that might, ultimately result in addressing their goals. And I think from that standpoint, admission side of organizations are gonna need to take a bit more of a crash course in career counseling. And I think that's going to be a very important discussion point as you see enrollment trends move forward.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that. I think we just have to keep beating the drum on the value of education, because while a degree continues to be the proven path out of poverty, it continues to be, our nation's, sort of currency for access and wealth. We have to resurface that a degree can give can break poverty cycles, can give students access to additional opportunities. I saw some chatter here, I think in the chat, that adult learners are seeking for certificates in short-term courses. Absolutely, right? And so that makes complete sense to somebody who's already in a career and looking to advance. And so when I'm speaking on this, I'm really talking kind of from the traditional, recent high school graduate looking to sort of figure out what that next pathway is or step is. A four-year degree has been sort of the proven way to kind of break those cycles.
And I would like to add to that as well at Utah State for what I think it's going to look like in the fall. I think you're right, Burke. I think that students now that they have a lot more choices, and they, some are taking gap years and trying to decide, see what's going to happen. But I do think that one thing that's going to be important is having creative programming. Universities need to get better at creating shorter certificates and creating some programming that's flexible for our post-traditional students. as well as our students that want to come and have a traditional higher education experience. And so I think what we're doing at Utah State with our entry points, we're trying to create pathways that we can bring students in wherever they're at and create pathways for them to get the type of certifications they want, to be able to either go out and get jobs. And as Xenia said, you know, it's the currency for all of us. It's our currency to wealth and to improving our lives. And so we're seeing that enrollments are down for fall, but our hope is, I noticed someone asked about the summer melt in the Q&A. I think that everybody's experiencing that and is worried about it. And one thing that we're doing is we're actually doing a marketing campaign around, you know, take the summer off and come back strong in the fall, be ready for fall kind of a thing. And so I think that's something that we're all gonna have and experience as we move forward in the next few months.
I'll add one point that I'm intrigued about watching over the next few years, and then after that we'll turn it over to the Q&A. So if you all have questions, start typing now. Begin typing, but and it's really based on both kind of personal anecdote, but then also StraighterLine, having done what we've done for 12 years, is online just doesn't have the fixed infrastructure of face-to-face, and so therefore is cheaper to deliver. And if it's cheaper to deliver, at some level it should be priced differently. And for 2 decades, colleges have not done that. They have priced their online courses the same or higher than face-to-face. It's always befuddled me a little bit about why students didn't start to demand that. And I think it's just legacy behavior. They weren't accustomed to asking for it. It was just never something that anyone occurred to. And so StraighterLine's built on that proposition. And I would argue that sort of many of the new providers who aren't colleges who are offering online coursework are built under the same proposition that, you know, it should be cheaper, but just you can't do it within the college structure. Anecdotally, I have a college sophomore. He would have been a college sophomore if he went to college this year, but he took the year off. But he goes to a small liberal arts college, and you know, they wanted him to come back virtually and pay full price. And it had us scratching our heads thinking, really, is that what we're gonna pay full price for? And so he took the year off and we'll go back next year. But I think what it has done is made it very clear to consumers that online should not cost the same as face-to-face. And we will see. That, you know, I can't say that for sure. I'm just saying it's a behavior I've expected for 10 years. It hasn't really emerged yet, but might be given the data that we're seeing in enrollment data, where the growth is and where the growth isn't. So we'll watch that going forward. Turning to our questions, the first one, and Rini had alluded to it, but what can college access organizations do during the summer to ease summer melt and keep incoming freshmen motivated?
I'm happy to take that, since the large majority of our NCAN members are community-based organizations doing this work, you know, and partnering with high schools and institutions. So, you know, there's a couple things, and I'm going to also plug in a resource in the chat for folks as well that has some really great resources on various topics around what CBOs can and should be doing around the issue of summer melt. You know, I think it's key to really try to grab students before they graduate. You know, doing something as simple like a senior survey that really gets at, you know, what are your plans? What are you thinking? What are the barriers? And we've got some really great examples of some kinds of surveys that folks can do. You know, usually that's been kind of a high school graduation checkout requirement, but I think they're really making that a really solid survey, not just about like, where are you going or what colleges did you get accepted into, to try to collect that kind of data, but really like meaningful questions that can really help an organization do some you know, specific outreach. You know, if you know that students have certain types of barriers, like they're saying they're not going to go to college because they have to work to support their families or you know, support the income in their household, you can do some very targeted outreach and have some very specific conversations. You know, hosting obviously summer hours, whether that's virtual or, you know, COVID safe in-person kinds of meetings to really help students reduce that summer melt. I mean, it's been known as COVID melt in the last year or so, but the summer melt has been an ongoing issue, right? Where students are getting hit with FAFSA verification, you know, all kinds of just requirements that then prevent a student from seamlessly enrolling. And I'll really call on our higher ed, you know, attendees here to say, you know, look to see who is in your community that you can partner with to really help those students transition over the summer, you know, whether that's a high school who says, you know, I've got 30 students who you know, are having X kinds of issues to enroll in your institution, whether that's at local community or four-year community college or four-year institution, and, you know, having some very targeted service or outreach to that group of students, that's what students need.
Great. Another question. Our students are having virtual burnout. Virtual in quotes, meaning I think they are burned out of being virtual. Are you experiencing that, and how do you help keep them engaged or re-engaged? There's probably Rini and Brandon, good questions for you all.
Yeah, so one of my responsibilities is I'm over USU Online. I'm the administrator over our online school. And what we have been trying to do over the whole year, because we knew that this was going to be an issue, is we created some materials and some artifacts around how to humanize the online learning experience. And we had opportunities to work with our faculty and develop some strategies for their in-class teaching when they're teaching in their classrooms, and then also for some of the extracurricular stuff that we did. A great example is just, you know, helping them understand, you know, how to use the online messaging boards, you know, in a more humane way, and how to do things similar to, you know, simple things as changing your virtual background and making yourself be more authentic when you teach, things like that. So we have been trying hard to keep that learning experience very authentic. And but to be honest, I think we're all experiencing a lot of virtual burnout. So we're trying hard to find ways to be to approach that engagement. And to be honest, we're using some of its technology solutions. Right now we're doing an evaluation of a new student experience technology that will make it a little bit more engaging and more human for our students. So I don't know, how about you, Brandon? You're online a lot too.
Yeah, no, I think those are wonderful. I think, you know, from our perspective, a good portion of our programming is online. We offer multiple forms of online, right? Asynchronous to online courses with some synchronous interaction. And so we give the students as much opportunity to kind of go back and forth as they need, right? And I think for our institution, we've really focused on expanding as much in the curriculum development area as possible, so that if students choose you know, to pursue one or the other. I mean, I think the other side of it is you got the burnout, and you also have the isolation, right? And from our standpoint, students also want to connect with peers. They want to connect with their instructors. They want to you know, have that connection and need that if that is an integral part of their connection and learning experience. And so I think just any way in which the institutions can maximize those options for students and really collect that level of preference and incorporate that into the student schedule as much as possible, I think will really improve, you know, the likelihood for which the students are able to kind of keep on track and not veer as a result of, you know, the new environment.
Another question. Any idea of how many people who work in the admission function are also expected to be career counselors? How much additional training costs, stretching an already thin staff even thinner? And I think this builds off your comment, Brandon, about how you know, going forward, admissions representatives are really career counselors, because that's what students are really, they're not really asking for the job to be done. They're not asking, how do I get into college? They're asking, like, what's going to happen if I get into college? And so I'd actually ask the panelists to answer that more broadly, because I don't think it necessarily has to be admissions officers doing career counselor jobs. I think it's sort of a larger question of marketing and sort of meeting the value question that students are really having. So Rini and Brandon, we would love to hear, really everybody, as any do.
I actually wanted to touch a little bit on the career counseling thing. Right now, I'm leading an initiative here at Utah State where we're reimagining our career services. Currently, our career services, we have less than 5 people in our career service area, but we do have a large admission staff comparatively. You know, there's over 10 to 15. And what we're doing right now is we're looking at the student life cycle and where career services, where the milestones are in that life cycle. And we're trying to figure out how we can embed that career education and that career curriculum and those artifacts in different places, and maybe even do so with our faculty and our advisors as well. We're just kind of trying to figure it out in a more strategic way and not do it the traditional way. And so that's something that we're going to be digging into this summer, and launching some initiatives around that in the fall. So I think it's very important, and that it speaks to that value proposition of, and how students know where to go and what to pick, what major, and it's going to be important that everybody has training and has knowledge around that. And so we're going to actually involve our faculty members and our advisors to help us with that career service mission.
That's a really, go ahead, Brandon, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would fully support that. And that's exactly the lens that the NU has taken with its career services area. I think, to answer the question, I've been in the admissions role 17 years. I can tell you, having worked in those areas, you feel like a career counselor, whether you're formally trained or not. I think one thing that we're really interested in providing students is the access to technology and tools that also allow them to kind of self-serve and do some exploration and identifying what those opportunities are, even kind of pre-enrollment, right? And so from that standpoint, it's not just putting a particular burden on an individual or a staff or a department, but really thinking about how students might want to interface with those resources. Some may benefit from a consultation and a more intensive one-on-one appointment. Others are more like, let me look at it myself. Let me kind of do the research on my own when I have my own time. But how intuitive is it? How accessible is it? And is that something that the institution makes available up front, or is that something that kind of comes around at the end when you're getting closer to graduation, right? And I think from that standpoint, that's the opportunity.
Yeah, conceptually, that's really interesting that in a sense, the career services and the admissions office are the same. And so I don't know if anyone else has had that insight or is doing it, but it's a really intriguing idea, is to sort of mush them together and then figure out how kind of reassign responsibilities accordingly. Another question from the audience. It says, question for Brandon in the online experience, though seeing as we're all doing the online experience, it's probably for everybody. Have you or your team had any discussions on staffing an after hours team available for your students? Do you feel there is a need for students supporting staff to be available from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. or so? Great
question. I think, so we'll say yes, we certainly have had our employees work extended hours and for a variety of different types of support services. More of those were short term, right, to meet the immediate needs of the students. In the long term, we've really focused on establishing partnerships with third-party organizations who, in some cases, are already equipped and designed to provide our students with that level of after-hour support. It's just an example, or tutoring services that have tutors in real time ready to go who are willing to meet with a student at 1:45 a.m. We don't necessarily have that configuration or infrastructure internally, but we do partner with outside organizations that complement the needs that we know are respective of the students. And so from that standpoint, it's been a little bit of both, most of which has been short term, but really continue to focus on ways in which we either are leveraging technology, or for the type of support service that may require an actual human being, a person, personality, a relationship, we do look to those partnerships. And that isn't just a third-party organization. Those are, in many cases, of course, very strategic partnerships that are unique to the student populations that usually benefit from them.
Curious, which tutoring service is it that you use?
So we use several. I think it's important to kind of realize that we, as a university with multiple campuses, had students who preferred to come into campus and meet with a writing tutor, for example. Others who like to leverage more of an asynchronous option, where I'll send you some of my materials and I'll get some formative feedback in that format, or a Zoom session. These different tutoring services that exist out there, Wyzant, tutor.com, National University also has its own internal tutoring support services with our own folks on staff that are trained to support students in a variety of ways, including language development. So it's really, I think, understanding the types of students that you serve and understanding what those preferences are. And if I could make a shout out to any form of technology, any tool that you have to collect student feedback, I think has just been invaluable from our standpoint, especially from the artificial intelligence, knowing that students would want, in some cases, to engage with a resource at 1:45 a.m. Are we just going to say we don't have it, you got to come back another day, or are we really going to work diligently to explore an option that makes sense for the institution and the student?
Yeah, it's a personal interest. I started Smart Thinking in 1999. So I've been doing online tutoring for too long. Well, I haven't been doing it a long time ago. Another question came in about peer mentoring, which I think is a interesting concept. And but peer mentoring can be a great lever when considering persistence during COVID. What are your thoughts on using peers for persistence, or does your campus currently use peer mentoring?
Yes, we do. Utah State University, we have just recently, because of this last year, implemented online peer mentoring. And that also goes into that question about keeping students engaged in that virtual burnout. Is we have online students that help other online students through this time, and they answer their questions, they talk to them about how to do things, and they help direct them to be successful in that online learning environment. And we find it very, very beneficial.
Any downsides to peer mentoring? I'm just truly just curious. It seems like something that it's a resource that can be accessed that colleges maybe haven't done as much of, and but it also seems like it could go off the rails at certain times. So
yeah, I think that we did a pilot, and then we took the good things we learned from the pilot, and then we implemented it kind of over again. And I think the thing that we learned was that not everyone wants to take advantage of it, right? We found that there are a lot of post-traditional students that are older adult learners that they don't necessarily need it. They basically are fine and they don't need it. And so there is some downsides that sometimes we don't match it right. And so it's important to match the students with other students so that they can help each other. So that sometimes can be a downside and can be tricky because you can mess it up sometimes.
Very, very much agree with that. I think if it feels too mechanical, it's not right. And I think from the mentoring process, one is making sure that you have a diverse pool of mentors, establishing that students might resonate with different stakeholders in the organization, peers, faculty, right, other individuals, even their admissions counselor, financial aid advisor. How do these individuals, connect after they meet on a consultative basis, depending on the services? And so we've deployed some technologies that allow just about anybody to get involved into the student experience. And the more that we work to understand the students and the preferences, then we get more insight in terms of how we can match those. And I think that is the opportunity. Certainly don't have that good to go today, but I think that is the future opportunity for organizations, is to get as much information around student preference and incorporate that into the options and support services, including the types of mentors that can provide the type of mentoring and or guidance or support that is going to be critical to that individual, rather than something a little more generic and a little more engineered.
So we are out of questions. So I'm going to throw you all one more wildcard question and as the wrap up comments. And so when we come back next year for the second annual Rethinking Admissions webinar, what will you want to have said now that we can refer back to next year? What prediction do you want to make about anything? The world, the admissions environment, the functionality, the project you're most excited about? What a year from now will you want us to refer back to?
I think that what I would like, I guess my hope for next year is that as a society, that we'll recognize how important our educators and our healthcare system workers are to us, and that we fund and that we compensate and we try to make education available for everyone. I really hope that this is something that we've gone through this last year, that we can take all the technology, the tools, the processes, the programs, and that we truly do make a difference and recognize how important the educational framework is to our society. That's what I hope. So we'll see if that happens.
Brandon?
I would certainly support that perspective. I know I also say that, again, back to that challenging the institution to think how we can support students in a differentiated way. That any process, any piece of technology, any tool, any pathway that all students have to go through we certainly caution those institutions to really reflect and make sure that they're clear on what those implications are for the students who ultimately seek access to, as Zinnia said, education, which is very defining. And I think from that standpoint, differentiation and just acknowledging that as an institution, we're a private tuition dependent nonprofit university, cost is always something to take into consideration and take those opportunities to redirect those resources to things like scholarship and other infrastructures that serve more students rather than more efficiency. I think it's about reaching more from that standpoint. We challenge those institutions to pursue that.
Another really huge question, Burke, and that's an awesome question. I love it. So thank you for that. Absolutely support everything that my colleagues here just said, and would probably add that, sort of in a couple of different areas that I think as a village, right, as a post-secondary sector between K-12 and higher ed and college access organizations, that we will have really created sort of the pipeline to take responsibility for this moment that is lost between high school graduation and the what's next, right? And so in speaking here in terms of post-secondary enrollment, that we will really have owned that space in a collaborative way, right? Where institutions really are partnering with their high schools and their community-based organizations, and really bringing forth resources, education, awareness, the value of education, to really help students through matriculation, right? Because that's, again, where we're really losing the data. And then the second part to that would be in the completion side. So again, leaning on my higher ed friends here, but again, also looking at other sectors that are supporting student completion, right? Because then we look at, sure, great, students are enrolling, but are they completing? So again, leaning back on data sharing, leaning back on, collaborative efforts on student wellness and holistic wellness, where students, again, don't just need academic support and tutoring, but they're needing, to get connected to SNAP benefits and maybe a social worker, and, getting access to daycare for their own children and their child and things like that. So a whole lot, but really, I think it comes down to partnerships and collaboration, so that we really can keep good on the promise to our young people, of what America can provide for them.
Excellent, great. Well, this is being recorded, so we do have a record to come back next year and see if you all were right. So there's so that is it for us. There are no additional questions. Thank you all for spending an hour with us on a Thursday, and maybe we'll do it again next year. So come back and see if Rini and Brandon and Zinnia were right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.